Good morning, Senior 1. This is Mr. Mu'taz Abdaim from Pioneers Olympic School, and this is our review for the grammar we have covered since the beginning of the term. When we start with talking about Unit 7, the first grammar we're going to deal with today, right? And the grammar we're going to deal with is going to be what we call modal verbs. Whenever we talk about modal verbs, we have many uses for the modal verbs. One of these uses, or the beginning of these uses here, is going to be using the modal verbs for showing necessity and obligation. When I say showing necessity and obligation, it's simply something that is a must, something that you have to do, simply because there is a kind of law, right? Or some people ordering you to do something like that. So when I say that I'm going to use the modal verbs for the first part in showing necessity and obligation, it's something that has to be done, right? It's something that is necessary, right? And you can never go with it. Sometimes, for example, it refers to laws, right? Sometimes also it refers to rules and so on, right? For example, when I come to school here, I must wear the school uniform, or I have to wear the school uniform. Whenever I want to show necessity or obligation, I either show them in the present now, right, or I show them in the past, right? So, and sometimes also I will show them in the future. So when I say, for example, now in the present you must follow the traffic rules, I mean that this is a rule, this is a law that you must follow, right? So when I say you must follow the traffic rules, or you have to be early to work, or you need to revise before the exam. We saw here, right, that the word must, right, could be used in any other ways, just like using have to or need to. What is so important here to understand that it's raining today, for example, so I must take a taxi, right? Or I have to take a taxi. But if I came into the past now and say yesterday it was raining, or it was raining yesterday, as you see in the example here, right? In that way, I'm not going to use must, I'm not going to use have to, and I'm not going to use need to. In that case, I will use the word had to. So we can say here that the only word representing the past or the obligation in the past is the word had to, right? Yesterday I had no money, right? So I had to use my credit card, right? Or yesterday, as we have seen here, it was raining, so I had to take a taxi. Now it's raining, I have to take a taxi, or I must take a taxi, or I need to take a taxi. But yesterday it was raining, so I had to take a taxi, right? This is the beginning of the use of the modal verbs for showing necessity, as I said, and obligation. When we got to, right, the present, it's going to be must or have to or need to, as I said. And when we got to the past, it's going to be had to. By the way, if you want also to use it in the future, right, you can never use must, right? You can never use need to, but you will use the word will have to, right? Of course, because plus the base form of the verb. So when I say, for example, tomorrow, right, I will have no car, so I will have to take a taxi, right? Or your dad won't collect you tomorrow, so you will have to take a taxi, and so on. Tomorrow I have an exam, so I will have to wake up early. So I'm talking now about showing, as I said, necessity and obligation. Part is in the present, part is in the past, and another part is in the future. But the question is exactly, what is the opposite of necessity and obligation? I mean, right, if I want to say, for example, that it's raining today, so I must take a taxi. So what if it's not raining today? I'm going to say, for example, I mustn't take a taxi. Am I going to put a rule or to put a law, right, to prevent that person, for example, from taking a taxi? I cannot say that. He has the right whether to take a taxi or not. And that's why, or that's what we call lack of necessity. What do I mean by lack of necessity? Something which is not necessary, but you have the right whether to do it or not to do it. For example, we're going to say, it's not raining today, so you take a taxi. Some people will say you mustn't take a taxi because sometimes must is the opposite of mustn't, and this is not true, right? This is not correct at all. Simply because when I say you must follow the traffic rules or you must take a taxi, it's a rule. And I cannot put a rule also here, right, in preventing that person from taking a taxi. He has the right, even if it's not raining. So it's not raining, so you don't have to take a taxi, or you needn't take a taxi, or you don't need to take a taxi. You saw here something that's very important. Whenever we're talking about lack of necessity, there's no obligation. You have the right to do whether that or not, right? It's what we call lack of necessity. We use don't have plus to. We use don't need also plus to. Of course, don't can change into doesn't with he and she and it, right? right? But in the middle here, we use the word needn't, which is very important because it's not followed by to, it's followed by the base form of the verb. And that's why we say needn't, right, is usually followed by what we call the base form. Sometimes people call it, right, the infinitive without to. So for example, today, for example, I'm going out with one of my friends, right? And I don't have money. So I will look at my friend and say, please, Ahmed, right, get your credit card, or you must get your credit card because I don't have money. But let's say, for example, that I have a lot of money. Am I going to say, please, Ahmed, right, you mustn't get your credit card because I have money? You cannot say that. But you will say, Ahmed, I have my credit card. You don't have to get your credit card, or you don't have to get your money. You don't need to get your money, or you needn't get your money. And that's what we call lack of necessity, right? But still, I am in the present. It's not necessary to get your money. But if Ahmed wants to get his money or his credit card, is it going to be a problem for me? Of course, it's not going to be a problem. When we change into the other parts here, we found that we're still in the lack of necessity. It's not necessary yet, right? But up till now, it was not raining. It was not raining when? Yesterday. So it was very clear here that it was not raining yesterday, so I didn't have to take a taxi. It was not important for me. It was not a rule for me to take a taxi. But also, if I want to take a taxi, it's okay. So it wasn't raining yesterday, so I didn't have to, or didn't need to, right? Or needn't have plus the past participle. So in that case, I'm going to say it was not raining yesterday, so I didn't have to take a taxi, or I didn't need to take a taxi, or I needn't have taken a taxi, right? So it wasn't raining yesterday, so I didn't have to take a taxi. I didn't need to take a taxi. I needn't have taken a taxi. But what if I took a taxi? Is it going to be a problem? Of course, it's up to me, right? So here I have the choice in my hand. And that's what we call lack of necessity. It's not kind of prohibition, right? And it's not kind, for example, of refusing, right, or giving a law that you shouldn't take a taxi. No, it's up to me. If I want to take a taxi, it's fine. If I don't want to take a taxi, it's also fine. And that's why I will say I don't have, or I didn't have to take a taxi. I didn't need to take a taxi, right? But I needn't have taken a taxi. And again, one of the most important, or let's say not the most important one, right, in the lack of necessity is the word needn't, right? For example, in necessity, it was need to, right? But when it changed into lack of necessity, it became needn't without to. And when it came into the past, you needn't have taken a taxi. So yesterday, I had a lot of money. You needn't have brought your credit card. Or for example, the refrigerator is full with fruits and vegetables, so you needn't have bought all this amount of fruits and vegetables, and so on. That means it was not necessary to do when in the past. Now, after I talked about showing necessity and obligation and showing lack of necessity, and I talked about the present and the past and the future part of them, let's have another use of the modal verb, which is what we call giving advice. This is what we call giving advice. What do I mean by giving advice here? If you want to give advice, you have to know pretty well, right, that the advice is optional for the person you are talking to. You can never, right, tell him that it's necessary or that it's obligatory, for example. I mean, you can never say that you must stop smoking, right? Because in that case, right, you're ordering him. Maybe his doctor can say you must stop smoking because it's dangerous for your life, or you must stop smoking or you will die in 3 days. That's his doctor saying that. But whenever I'm talking to one of my friends, it's just kind of advice. And usually in advice, we use the word should plus the base form, right, of the verb. When I say the base form of the verb, you have to remember that it means the infinitive without to, or not using to. So you should stop smoking. We can see here that should is not followed by to. In the present, it's still advice. The person is standing in front of me. I'm giving him a piece of advice, saying you should stop smoking. You can also say you ought to see a doctor, or you ought to stop smoking, and so on. So we found here that the word should is exactly like ought to. Some people do not know that ought to, let's say for example, is stronger or a little bit stronger than should, but it's not as strong as must. Right? You have to know that it's something in the middle. Maybe it's a very strong advice. So you say you should stop smoking, or you ought to see a doctor, and so on. But also in the advice, you can say you shouldn't smoke heavily, or you oughtn't smoke heavily. The negative of ought is oughtn't, right? Or you oughtn't smoke heavily. Of course, ought also is followed by to. You oughtn't to smoke heavily. Finally, I want to finish. Now it's a present, so now it's advice. So now I'm talking to the person. The person here is standing in front of me, and I say, for example, you should stop smoking. Let's say, for example, that after 3 or 4 days I asked about this person, and I found him in hospital, right? I will go to visit him. The doctor said that his problem or his health problem is because of smoking, and in that case I will say, you should have stopped smoking. Am I giving him a piece of advice now, or it's a kind of blame or regret? I'm blaming him for not listening to my advice. I told you from the beginning that you should stop smoking, and you didn't stop smoking, and you went to hospital. And that's why you say you should have stopped smoking, which means that I told you to stop smoking, and you didn't do it, and it's kind of blaming you or showing kind of regret. And that's usually is created by following should with have and then the past participle of the verb. So you should have revised well before the exam. So you can see here that the difference between you should stop smoking, for example, and you should have stopped smoking, for example, is that the advice in the present is using should plus the base form, and in the past it's not going to be a piece of advice at that time, it's going to be a piece of blame. And that's why I will say you should have revised well before the exam. That means that this person didn't revise for the exam, or his exam was so bad, and that's why he should have revised well. Or you ought to have helped her, which means that he didn't help her, right? We can see here that still ought to is followed by have and the past participle. So the question now, or what we want to talk about now, is that whenever you want to change the advice into blame, and whenever you want to change the advice, right, into past, you're going to add have plus the past participle, whether to should or to ought to, right? And that's why you said you ought to have helped her, or you shouldn't have laughed at her, which means that this person laughed at the girl, and that was not something good to do. Now I talked about the first part of the grammar mentioned in this curriculum, right, or the first part tackled that should be tackled, which is related to Unit 7, the use of modal verbs. A quick overlook again, as I said, showing necessity and obligation using must, have to, and need to. In the past, it's going to be had to. In the future, it will be will have to, right? The opposite of necessity is lack of necessity, as I said. That's going to be, it was not raining, so you don't have to, needn't have to, or don't need to. When I put it in the past, it will be didn't have to, didn't need to, needn't have plus the past participle. And finally, giving advice is going to be using should or ought to. In the past, it's not advice anymore. As I said, it's kind of what? It's kind of blame, and it's going to be created by using should or ought to plus have plus the past participle. That was about the first part in Unit 7, and then we are going to go into the second part of the grammar tackled in this curriculum. Again, it's a grammar senior 1, right? And as I said, grammar 8, it's what we call conditional if. First, I'm going to talk about the difference between the 0 and the first type, and then we are going to go into the second type, the third type, alternatives, and so on, right? So when I say, for example, I'm in grammar 8 talking about conditional if, that means we have, as you know, right, 0 type, first type, second, and third. But mainly, what is the difference between the 0 type and the first type? Before anything, the rule followed in the 0 type is that the if, right, or the words if, right, has to be followed by a verb in the present simple and another verb also in the present simple. Meanwhile, in the first type, if is followed by present simple, but in the other side, it is going to use will or may or can or shall. Just like, for example, if you heat ice, it melts, 0 type. Just like, for example, if you study hard, you will succeed, first type. When I got into the difference between the 0 and first type, because some people say if this is in the present and this is in the present, why don't we use one of them, right, and forget about the other? But let's say, for example, that if I'm talking about the zero type, it's going to be as follows: general facts, scientific facts, and personal habits. What do I mean by general facts? Anything that happens in, right, our life or our world, but it's 100% sure to be done. It doesn't have any kind of possibility, right? Just like when I say, if you drink poison, you die. I'm not talking about you now or immediately, and I'm not talking about a certain type of poison, but I'm stating a fact that people drinking poison die, right? Just like, for example, when I say, I'm stating a fact that if someone important dies, it is a great loss. So you found here that I used, right, the zero type in the general fact, saying if you drink poison, you die, or if someone important dies, it is a great loss, right? Also, we use the zero type for the scientific facts, which is the common use, right? When we say, for example, if you boil water, it evaporates, or if you heat ice, it melts, and so on, right? And we use them also for what we call personal habit. Something that is related only to me, something that is my habit. When I say, for example, if I don't drink my morning coffee, I'm talking about me only, about my morning coffee only. Which coffee exactly? The morning coffee. So when I say, if I don't drink my morning coffee, I feel tired the following day. That is a fact for me. That is the rule for me. That is something that happens to me whenever I forget to drink my morning coffee. Let's say, for example, what about Ted, right? If he doesn't drink his morning coffee, right? Also, it's up to him. But what about the other people, right? It's not a general fact. It's something related to me. And that's going to show the difference between the first type and the zero type. When we said in the zero type, right, general facts, scientific facts, and personal habits. But when we got into the first type, which is if followed by present simple, will, may, or can, or shall, plus the base form of the verb. So I said whenever I say infinitive, it's the base form. I mean without to. So if you study hard, you will succeed. It's usually used for future possibility, something that might happen in the future, right, if you do the condition. And the condition here is to study. And the result is that you will succeed. But for the specific facts, and that is the difference here between what we call general facts and specific facts, right? If you drink poison, you die, right? But when I say if you drink this poison now, you will die. In that case, it's a specific fact. Or for example, when I say, if you water these plants, they die or will die. Or if you water plants, they die or will die. Have a look at these two sentences, please. If you water these plants, and if you water plants, take care that we have the word these. So if I say if you water plants, I'm talking about all the plants generally. But when I say if you water these plants, I'm talking about something specific. So if you water these plants or these plants, right, they will die. Because this is a specific fact related to the first type. Okay? But when I say, for example, if you water plants generally, we came back to the idea of what? Of the rule or of the general fact. And in that case we say, if you water plants, any kind of plants, general fact, they die. The first one is, right, the first one, is specific, and that's why we put it in a zero type. And the second one is general, and that's why we put it in the first type. So if you water these plants, they will die, but if you water plants, they die. It's just like, for example, when I say here, right, if someone important dies, it is a great loss, any person. But if my father dies, right, it will be a great loss, because I'm talking about my own fact, right, my life, my father, it's something personal. It will be a great loss only for me, right? But here, it's a great loss for everybody because he is an important person. Some special cases related to the first type. If you need help, it's not going to be you will or you may or you can or you shall or plus infinitive. This is, of course, the main rule, right? But here we have some special cases. If you need help, call me. If you need help, don't hesitate to call me. If you need help, you must call me. If you need help, you should call me. If you need help, it's okay to call me. And we found here that we use it in the imperative, right? Positive and negative. We use it in necessity, right? We use it for advice as well. And we use it using it's okay. So you have to need to know that whenever you have infinitive for imperative or necessity or advice or it's okay, in that case you know it's still in the first type, and that's why the first verb is going to be the present simple. Let's talk now about the second type and the third type of conditional if. Still in conditional if, right? And we have covered the zero type and the first type and the little slight differences between them. And then comes time for the second type. The main question in the second type that people say, if in the second type is followed by the past simple, and on the other side you have would or might or could plus the base form or the infinitive. The question is, if is followed by the past simple, that means that the second type is talking about something in the past or about something in the present. Of course, the question, or the spontaneous question that would come out of you would say that the second type is if followed by past simple, so it's talking about something in the past. This is totally incorrect. Whenever I talk or whenever I use the second type, I have to know very well that the rule or the type is written in the past simple, but the second type is talking about something in the present. So some people will object, saying, excuse me, sir, but you've told us before, right, that in the first type, or that the first type is talking about the present simple, right? So how can the second type also talk about the present? I will say that the second type is present simple or present action, but it is present, right, unreal, imaginary, or hypothetical situation. So I'm talking about something in the present. I'm talking about something in the present, but it's something which is not real, something which is hypothetical, something which is imaginary. I am a teacher. I'm not a doctor, by the way. So for example, while I'm working now, somebody fainted. Some students will say, please, sir, help that fainting girl. I would say, I'm sorry, I am not a doctor, right? But if I were a doctor, I would help her. Why did I put this verb in the past, right? The people will say, right, because you want to say, or you want to put yourself in a hypothetical situation, in a situation which is not real for you. That's right, right? Because when I say, if I were a doctor, I would help her, but unfortunately, I am not a doctor. So it's in the present, yes, but it's opposite to reality, or what we call something hypothetical. When I give you advice, for example, and I say, if I were you, I would see a doctor. Of course, I can never be you. It's some kind of hypothetical situation or imaginary, unreal situations. So again, we use the second type. Take care. Again, we use the second type whenever we talk about something in the present, but it has to be imaginary, unreal, or a hypothetical situation, not like the first type. The first type is something that happens in our life. If you study hard, you will succeed, right? But if I had a car, right, I would give you a ride. That means that I do not have a car, right? And that means that I am putting myself in a hypothetical situation in case I had a car, which means that there's no car outside. So the second type is followed by the past. If is followed by the past simple, would or might or could plus infinitive. If I have money, I would help you. Or if I found a treasure, I might buy a house. Or if I were you, I would see a doctor. Or if I were a doctor, I would help her. Of course, you take care that we use the second type usually in a form of advice, using the form, if I were you, I would. And you have to know also that in the second type, it's preferable, right, to follow all, right, all the pronouns or all the subject with the verb were instead of was. I would say, for example, if I were a doctor, if she were rich, if he were my friend, and so on, instead of using was. That doesn't mean, by the way, that was incorrect, right? But it's better, or it's preferable, as I said here, right, to use were. Finally, we arrived at the third type. We talked about the zero, general facts and scientific facts and so on, future probability, right, in the first type, right, present action but written in the past because it's hypothetical and so on. So the only third type, talking about the past, is the third type. You have to know very well, whenever you have any word that shows that you are talking about something that happened or didn't happen in the past, so it is the third type. The formation of the third type is a little bit longer than the zero and first and second. It's followed by the past perfect. You remember that the past perfect is had plus the past participle. On the other side, would or might or could have plus the past participle. When should I use it exactly? I use it to express something which is opposite to what had happened. For example, here, yesterday my wife came late, so I divorced her. There was a great quarrel between me and her, and I had to divorce her. My wife came late in the past, and I divorced her also. I divorced her in the past. So I'm going to create a sentence using if. And in that case, I will use the third type because the sentence is originally in the past simple. And I will write exactly opposite to what had happened. My wife came late, so I divorced her, right? So if my wife not come late, I not divorce her. Use the rule, I will say the sentence is in the past, so I have to use or to follow the third type. It's going to be if my wife hadn't come late, right, I wouldn't have divorced her. Which means that she came late and that I divorced her, right? So for example, the boy didn't revise for the exam, so he didn't succeed. I will say, if he had revised, he would have succeeded, which means that he didn't revise and he didn't succeed. So if I had revised, right, I would have succeeded, but unfortunately it didn't happen. I didn't revise and I didn't succeed, and that's why I said if I had revised I would have succeeded. You can see here that we have a sense of regrets. The man drove carelessly, so he had an accident. I will say, if he had driven carefully, he wouldn't have had, take care, he wouldn't have had an accident, right? Which means that he didn't drive carefully and that he had an accident. Finally, a little bit, the word unless, which exactly means if not. And you need to know, by the way, that unless that equals if not, right? Is used in any type. I mean, in the 0, 1st, 2nd, whatever. It's exactly the negative of the word if. If she doesn't study, she will fail. So I will say unless equals if not. So in that case, you remove if and you remove the negative. And it's going to be unless she studies, she will fail. Does that mean if she studies, she will fail, or if she doesn't study, she will fail? If she doesn't study, she will fail. Unless she studies, she will fail. That was, let's say, for example, a brief account, right, about the conditional if, which is presented in Grammar 8 in your curriculum, Senior 1. Until I meet you in Grammar 9, have a good time. Senior 1, hello again. This is Grammar 9, the reported statements usually, or we're focused on the statements. Of course, in brief, right, and we have taken the chains all in our copybooks in our classes, the difference between the direct speech and reported, or what we call indirect speech. You see here that the direct speech is the actual words, or the exact words as they came out of the mouth of the speaker. I mean, for example, when I talk about myself, I say, I am Mr. Mu'taz. I'm working here for Pioneers Olympic School. I'm doing my grammar review for my students and so on. When I talk about myself and say I, but when people talk about Mr. Mu'taz, they will say he. And that is the difference exactly between this girl talking about herself, saying I'm busy today, right, between inverted commas, as you can say, because, as you can see, sorry, because this is, right, the actual, or these are the actual words that came out of her mouth, and talking about herself. She said I, so I'm busy today, she said to me. And when I change it into reported speech, you found here that she told me that she was busy that day. What has happened here? I took these words, her actual words, I took the words from her mouth, I took him, put him on my own mouth, and use him or report him to somebody else. That's why I say, I'm busy today, she said to me. She told me that she was busy that day. You notice that when she talked about herself, she said I, but when I talked about her, I said she, right? So I'm busy today, she said to me. She told me that she was busy that day. How exactly I'm going to change from the direct into reported speech? I will say that if you have the word said, it remains said, right? And if you have the word said to, it's going to change into told. But by the way, for example, or it says, it will be the same, right? But when, for example, it say to or says to, it will be tell or tells, right? You also remove the inverted commas, right? And instead of the inverted commas, you put the word that, and take care that the word that is optional. What do I mean by the word that is optional? I mean that you have the right to use it and you have the right not to use it, right? Because sometimes, for example, when people do not find the word that, take care that in seniors, right, we do not rewrite or we do not report the sentences, right? But we have some choices. So whenever you find that the word that is not mentioned or is not written here, that means one thing, that it's okay, that the sentence is right. And there is no mistake with the sentence, as I said, because that is optional. But me, myself, I prefer usually to use it. You change also the tenses, the pronouns and adverbs, right, according to what has been written in your copybooks. Refer to them if you please. So we have 2 sentences here to report. We will meet you tomorrow, Clara said to me. I will take it part by part, starting with Clara said to me. You found the word said, that's why said to, that's why you're going to change it into Clara told me. You will remove the inverted commas and use the word that I said before, which is optional. Clara told me that. We will meet you tomorrow. We will change into they, because it's Clara and her friends, for example. Clara said to me, they will change into would meet me the following day. By the way, the word tomorrow, as you know very well, could be the following day, could be the next day, could be the day after, and so on. I can't help you now, she said to me. So I will say that she told me that she couldn't help me at that moment. Everybody knows that the word now could change into then, and it could be at that moment. But you have to know, before we go, that there are some cases that you cannot change, and these cases are very important. How many cases I have written here on the board? There are 4. She loves me, he says. I came late yesterday, he said. Just now, ice melts by heating, he said, and my train leaves at 6, he said. We can see that the first sentence, she loves me, he says. So the first part, or the first no change case, is the case of the present introductory verb. What do I mean by the introductory verb? I mean the verb of saying, which is the word say, tell, ask, and so on. Whenever this verb is in the present, all these chains are going to be removed, except for the for the pronouns, by the way. So, she loves me, the sentence is in the present simple, which is supposed to be changed, as you know, into the past simple. But in that case, I will keep it, and I will say, he says that Sue loves him. Some people will say, sir, you kept the present simple as present simple? I will say yes, because the introductory verb is still in the present, so you do no change, or you make no change. In the second sentence, I came late yesterday, he said just now. And we see here that he used the word just now or immediately, which means that the man, right, has just said these words, which means that we are still in the present time and we haven't left, right? And that means also that I will make no change. So just now, for example, or a moment ago, he said a moment ago, or he said just now, or he has just said, that means also that I will make no change. So I will say he, right, said just now that he came late yesterday. Some people will say, am I going to keep yesterday without changing into the previous day, for example, or the day before? I will say yes, because the man said just now or a moment ago. Ice melts by heating. Some people will refer to the previous lesson, the zero type, conditional if, what we call, right, scientific fact. Ice melts by heating. This is a scientific fact. So I will say, he said that ice melts by heating, which is, as I said before, which is also a fact. So facts do not change. We do not change whenever the introductory verb is in the present, and we do not also change when we use the word just now or a moment ago. And finally, we do not change when we talk about a timetable. My train leaves at 6, right? So this is what we call a timetable. And the sentence is going to change into, he said that his train leaves at 6. Of course, for more or for further information and exercise and practice, it's a good idea to refer to Al-Mu'asir. For any questions, you can contact me at any time, and I will be ready to answer. Right? You just send me the answers that you have done, and I will check with you. I will check them with you, whether on WhatsApp or in an SMS or whatever. Right? Thank you, Senior 1. Been pleasure being with you, and I hope to see you next year.